The Acorn People, What I Learned at Summer Camp by Ron Jones. The woods and paths of Camp Wigan were accustomed to troops of running feet and the noise of children at play. With these children there was only silence. Parents unfolded wheelchairs and carefully lifted their children into them. In procession they wheeled the children, about 120 in all, toward us waiting counselors. They would be under our care for the next 2 weeks. What do you say to a parade of children who move toward you only by the energy of their parents? Children with swollen heads or sightless eyes or bodies without arms or legs. Children drained of expression, pallid in color and spirit. They seemed old for their age, yet without visible life, crumbled and stuffed into wheelchairs, covered with blankets to ward off not the cold, but the sight of disfigurement. The camp nurse had given us a one-day orientation about handicapped children, but nothing could have prepared us for such an appalling mass of injury. She told us most would not live past their teens. It was nature's way. The children were transferred from parents to the camp staff like precious stamps being traded by collectors, objects of value but no voice. There was no sign of welcome or excitement. Weary from long drives and the emotion of parting, the parents didn't say much. They paused, mentioned how nice the camp looked, and quickly said goodbye. The counselors welcomed their new responsibility with an equal degree of decorum. There were 2 of us for each cabin of 5 or 6 children. My cabin mate was Dominic Cavelli, a tall youth with a slight but strong body and a deep love for children. Unlike me, Dom planned on a career with handicapped children. I had only been looking for a summer job. Of course, I did rationalize about the importance of serving others and having compassion for the kids, but basically all I really wanted was to make some money for a couple of weeks and to enjoy summer camp life. I had been an athlete and a physical education major in college, and the illusion of playing with kids and swimming and hiking all day had drawn me to this place. The ending of an illusion. My illusions quickly disappeared. I was not about to frolic with these children. It would be fortunate, I thought, if we could even take a few steps together. As they assembled for cabin assignments, I wondered what these children with hollow faces and nervous twitches were thinking. Did they even think, or feel, or hope? I didn't have much time to wonder. There was work to do. Every movement required a tug and a push. Just crossing the campground from the assembly point to the cabins took about 20 minutes per child. Some could be pushed, but others had to be carried or patiently guided. Like the other counselors, Dominic and I swept back and forth carrying children and luggage. None of us had any experience at this task, and the camp was not set up for handicapped children. It was a Boy Scout camp designed for normal, healthy children. Each cabin had 3 steps, which became hurdles for us. You can't wheel a chair straight up a set of stairs. When I tried with the first kid, I spilled him head first. The simplest tasks had to be learned. The camp was divided into 2 rows of cabins, with boys on one side, girls on the other. At one end of the rows stood the camp dining hall, bathrooms, flagpole, and swimming pool. The flagpole had a loudspeaker on it that barked greetings and information to all campers, and played songs left over from the Boy Scouts. In the midst of this organized hello, I was making painful trips to the toilet. No sooner had one kid gotten unpacked and comfortable than it was off to the bathroom. These trips became an ordeal. I silently cursed the absence of grab bars. Pants had to be pulled over cumbersome braces that caught on anything within reach. I had never changed anyone's pants before, much less balanced a child on a toilet, only to be told in sobs, "I don't have to go now." Back with the pants, lifting and tugging until I was sitting in the wheelchair with a wet child sitting in my lap. The struggle went on. Every move, whether brushing teeth or simply rolling over, required assistance and made me feel like a slave. I resented it. I looked forward to the first evening meal. At last, a chance to sit down and eat in peace. Dom and I got our kids to the hall by moving in shifts. After the recorded Boy Scout prayer, I sat eating. Then I realized half the kids couldn't feed themselves. Angry, I started pushing spoonfuls of peas and potatoes into open mouths. By evening, I was exhausted and wanted out. I questioned the camp and loudspeaker that kept us moving and myself. I couldn't get close to the kids, and I didn't want to. I feared this illness and disfigurement surrounding me would somehow rub off. In a nightmare, I dreamed of children's legs and heads unscrewing and parts of bodies coming off in my hands. Morning greeted our cabin with a chilling cold and the smell of urine. 3 kids had wet their beds. A 4th rolled over on an artificial bladder, causing it to burst. In a stupor, Dom and I began the cleaning and the morning runs to the bathroom. The loudspeaker hurried everyone to breakfast with a trumpet call. You gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up in the morning. Breakfast was noisy. For the first time, I felt the kids' presence as individuals. Each of them was watching Dom and me, stealing a glimpse and then staring, perhaps wondering if we would stay. It wasn't a challenge, but a real question. I felt it and looked back. The 5 cabin mates. Sitting next to me was Benny. Black and peanut-sized. Polio had taken his legs, but not his gall or heart. He was the most mobile kid at the camp, one that Dom and I didn't have to push or help with the toilet. He was his own man. Benny was also a speed demon. With a crash helmet pulled tightly over his head, he hunched forward in his wheelchair like a stock car race driver. With incredible speed, he would careen across the dusty campground, then spin around and head back to the cabin, finishing with a wheelie. The next kid in our cabin was Spider, a name meant to be funny because he had no arms or legs, only stumps that stuck out of his short frame like broken branches on a tree. Like Benny, Spider was alert and perceptive. Unlike many of the kids who seemed to stare without seeing, Spider's eyes held everything, and what his eyes couldn't hold, his mouth tried to trap. He loved to talk and talk and talk. He had to be fed, but even that did not stop him. He just talked, swallowed, and talked some more. Thomas was far less active and alert than Benny or Spider. He had muscular sclerosis, the cruelest ailment of all. He must have been 15 or maybe 16. Benny and Spider looked and acted like the 8- and 10-year-olds they were, but with Thomas it was hard to tell. All the kids were light in weight, but Thomas was the lightest, about 35 pounds. Picking him up was like holding a collapsible tent. It just gave way. His bones seemed unconnected, and indeed, that's what the disease had done. Over 11 years, it had slowly robbed Thomas of the fiber and muscle that holds the body together. I think watching and feeling this gradual deterioration of his body gave Thomas a knowledge of depression not held by children afflicted from birth. His eyes seemed like deep wells full of secrets. He watched the world about him, but gave nothing in reply. Unwilling to move unless moved, he sat covered by a dark blanket, pensive, patient, and dying. Martin, about 14, was the most able-bodied child in our cabin. Like other blind children, he had a constant smile and seemed in perpetual motion. When sitting, he would rock gently forward and back. When standing, he swayed rhythmically. I wondered what sound or unseen tide pulled at him. Tall and slender, with bright red hair that stuck out in every direction, he marched across the campground like a ship navigating by compass. I was amazed at how straight he walked. He seemed to sense trees and limbs and other objects at head level. His only sensory block seemed to be at ground level. A tree root would cause him to stumble and curse, not at the obstacle, but at himself for not seeing it. Aaron was the 5th and final kid under our charge. He got the nickname Arid because of his smell, which was awful. He had no bladder, nor any normal means to push the waste from his body. His skin was always clammy. A large plastic bag strapped to his leg was attached by a tube to his intestines. It collected a urine waste that had to be emptied every hour. Arid hated his own smell as much as those around him did. He repelled any gesture of friendship. It stalled and interrupted any conversation before it could begin. His was a terrible condition for anyone, but particularly for a young teenager. A collection of suffering. Those were our 5 charges, and I was hardly pleased by the prospect of caring for them. This wasn't the way the job description had read. Maybe I could deal with one such child, but the thought of responding to such a collection of suffering was overwhelming. I wanted to go home, to run away from this defective flesh as fast as I could. I considered getting sick or being called away by a family emergency, but at the same time I was afraid to leave and face the thought that I couldn't take it. On our first day of activity, we were assigned to the craft area in the morning. I rounded up Benny, got Martin to work with Spider, and gave Thomas and Arid a private workspace. The craft table was full of leftover Boy Scout materials and sample projects, whistles, hatchet holsters, Indian headdresses, and bookends made from pine cones. Out of frustration, I busied myself making an acorn necklace. Spider kept asking what it was for, and finally I blurted out, "I feel a little weird being here, so I've made myself a necklace of nuts." Spider didn't recoil. He just laughed and said, "So do we, Counselor. We're all a little nutty here." Benny added, "You might call us the Nut People." "Yeah, that's a good name for us." I turned to Spider to tell him, "My name isn't Counselor, it's Ron." He was already off with another question. "Mr. Counselor, Ron, can we make a necklace like yours?" "Sure," I said. Benny raced about collecting every nut in sight. Spider told him where they could be found. Martin strung most of them together. Soon all of us were wearing acorn necklaces. This encounter had given us something in common. At lunch, the other kids noticed the necklaces. Spider explained to them, "We're the Acorn people, can't you see? So we were christened by our own act. Like it or not, we became the Acorn people, drawn together like blood brothers." Freedom from wheelchairs. That afternoon, the kids in our cabin were assigned to the swimming pool. We put an orange life jacket on each child, lifted them carefully into the pool. The water gave their bodies buoyancy and freedom. Soon the restricted movements ended and the teasing and splashing began. Children held in bondage to wheelchairs and harnesses were suddenly free. They were comic aliens on a strange liquid planet. Popping up and down in the water, they held each other and bobbed in unison to create huge waves. They chased about like orange speedboats or sharks and sea monsters, squirting each other with water. Each kid approached the water in his own special way. Arid had to paddle about in an inner tube, holding his bladder bag above the water. It was his secret weapon. He jokingly threatened to squirt anyone who splashed him. Benny grabbed a tube and became the fastest thing in the water. Arms flailing away like a windmill, he looked like a pool cleaning machine gone berserk. If Benny was the speed king of the pool, Thomas was a luxury cruise ship. With elegant grace, he rode the waves on top of 3 inner tubes. As for Martin, he was the classic submarine, using the noise and the pressure of the waves to dodge and chase Benny with radar-like accuracy. Of all the children in camp, Spider was the most amazing in the water. Just as I was about to carry him into the pool, he plunged in head first, pulling himself through the water like a dolphin. He would surface, take a breath, then shoot under again, only to arc back to the surface and dive once more. Using a whip-like, undulating motion, this limbless child could swim. That evening, after the loudspeaker had blared taps and good night, the Acorn Society held its first meeting. The light from our lantern cast flickering shadows on the cabin floor. A long, difficult day had passed. I sensed that the trial I felt was shared. It was hard on everyone. I remembered how Benny had cried the first time I had changed him. I was angry at the time, and he must have been hurt and humiliated at my rough handling. The day had been full of such minor misfortunes as well as small victories. Somehow we had gotten through it together, and I began to feel I could make it too. The next morning the damned camp loudspeaker woke us up again. It was warm and cozy, and I didn't want to get up. The floor was cold, and the metal wheelchairs and leg braces were chilling to the touch. The cabin was confining and not designed for wheelchairs, but we managed. Like a cavalry unit, Cabin 4 was getting harnessed up for the day. No one had wet his bed. I disconnected Arid's bladder bag and ran down to the bathroom to dump it. At least it was warm. I was amazed at how quickly Dom and I adapted to the task of getting everyone dressed and moving. For the first time, we were all looking forward to the day ahead. On our way to breakfast, I noticed we all had our necklaces on. The Acorn people were on the move.